we're starting to talk about climate change today and Earth changes. Very hot topic, especially after this summer in the Northern Hemisphere. I think the global warming fans are very happy to have such a hot summer. And as you know, I think I'm quite a critic of man-made climate change, especially what they call global warming. I think it's much more complex and more astronomically caused because it's also happening on other planets. But definitely we have climate change and we have weather. So we can talk endlessly, especially in Switzerland. People love to talk about the weather to avoid other hot topics. But now even talking about the weather has become quite problematic. So let's start. Last year, I think you predicted a lot of mudslides. We have a video up there. A lot of mudslides for 2018 and earth water related events. That was certainly the case, and I think we will do a video with some examples of it at the end of this year to prove that this was actually a valid prediction. So we start with the geological outlook or the geological and climate outlook for the next months and next years. So any findings there or anything that is that you want to say?
Yeah, basically, I think early, or was it probably late last year, it predicted a lot of mudslides and disturbances in the earth. Now, what that really means is that we're going to experience disturbances on the earth. And I did talk about this year until about October, September, October, we're going to see disturbances in the air also. So what that meant was that there was going to be really high winds. And we saw that immediately. Early part of this year, we saw people actually being flown away, pushed away by the wind in Holland and in other places in Europe. And this is what's documented. There's a lot of wind disturbances that we saw around the world where houses are falling apart and blown away and things like that. So this will continue with the hurricane season and the tornado season that will also continue this year. But in terms of the disturbances of the earth, which includes mudslides, volcanoes, and earthquakes. So this will continue this year and next year. So from the fall of this year and particularly next year, so towards, let's say, October, November, even maybe late September, we're going to see more earthquakes and volcanoes, starting up. But it will increase, and next year we're going to see more of the earthquakes and volcanoes, and including more of the mudslides sometime around next year. So basically what we're looking on in terms of the mudslides predictions that I made this year is just the beginning. It's not even the culmination of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course other people predicting similar things, especially those who are studying not necessarily astrology, but astronomy, because at the moment we have like all planets on one side of the sun, and when that happens, usually also the big gas giants are pulling on the Earth and of course pulling on the Earth's crust. So there's a lot of astronomical evidence also that. And then there is, of course, the people speaking about the electrical universe theory that becomes more and more established, where it basically states that there is a potential potential exchange between the planets. So if you have all planets on one side close together, then of course there's much more work done on the Earth's crust and the the equatorial bulge, etc.
The predictions I've been making is purely based on Indian astrology. So it's called Vedic Astrology. So that's where the information I'm relying on. And of course, it has to be seen over time. It's always nice to go back in hindsight and see what came out true, what didn't come out true, and how to actually refine the predictions, over time. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, you have earthquakes all the time, and mudslides, but I think it's not so easy to find statistics kind of about, for instance, the amount of mudslides that happen globally per year. But I personally really see, since I'm following these things since quite some time, times I really see an uptick in what you said. So it's a bit difficult and tedious to follow up, but can be done.
Yeah, and also there are some mudslides that are not reported. I mean, just in India, in India, if you just look at India itself, today, just this year, they've had more than 60 or 70 mudslides. But
Okay.
what's reported that we can find in Western media, of course, they've been reported in Eastern media. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're referring partly to the elements, not the traditional 4+1
Exactly.
elements.
Right.
So does ether or akashas play a role in this?
All of the elements, but mainly what has happened is that the Earth is disturbed for this year, next year, and that has actually an influence because of Saturn. So you'll find that Saturn has created disturbances in the Earth. And the first part actually was due to winds. The winds are going to die down this year, at the end of this year. But then we're going to see more precipitation in terms of record snowfall this year, and then also record rains next year, where rains and water really create disturbances and actually shifts the Earth. So one of the reasons why I was actually looking at India was mostly because there's been tremendous mudslides in the Himalayan range. I mean, on a really frequent basis. And so that's a huge problem. I had been looking early on in February and March, there were some major mudslides in the California side, and that was reported. And because I know the area, these are the areas I know about, so I pay a little bit more attention to that. But of course, in Rwanda and Burundi and Tanzania, actually, places where we were before, we found also a lot of mudslides, which only the local media reports, but we don't get to hear it in the national medias.
Yeah, I mean, you can find it on Google sometimes, and there are people who collect this information and list it. I think I sent you a link the other day to one site that has kind of categories of climate changes, and
Right.
some of articles on it.
Yeah.
So another next kind of topic or question I want to get into. I mean, we had a very hot summer in Europe as well, and what I noticed is, for instance, that there's a huge amount of humidity in the air, a lot of moisture. So it was, even here, it was very hazy, but it hardly rained, so that you had constant lightning storms, and but it didn't rain down for some reason. That was quite interesting. And now it started raining, and really the temperature plummeted in a very short time, from 30 something degrees to 15, 17 degrees in some places. I think even in Sicily or Sardinia, it was like a huge plummet of temperature, and then you had hailstorms in Sardinia from the glaring sun, so that the changes were quite immense.
Yeah, if you remember, early on when we did the early videos, I predicted that the summers are going to be really, really hot, and the winters are going to be really, really cold. So what I talk about, the problems in the air, essentially is that it's dry air. So when it's really hot, we're going to feel extreme hot weather. And then when it comes to cold, we're going to see fluctuations that is going to be really cold. So early on, I had made a prediction that when it's going to get hot, it's going to get really hot. When it's going to get cold, it's going to get really cold. And that's exactly what we're experiencing this summer, unlike other summers, So we have this huge fluctuation from cold to hot, and nothing in between compared to the other summers.
Yeah, that's exactly what we are seeing, I think. So the question now remains, if it's very hot and if it's very cold, you have like these two camps of letting aside the man-made aspect of climate change. Is it getting colder, or is it getting warmer overall like globally. And I think it's a very difficult question, especially even for scientists, because it depends very much on the points of measurements and how you measure it, etc. So do you have any indicators somehow for the next 3 to 10 years, I would say, if it's generally getting hotter or colder, and will there be a new equilibrium? Do you see something like this, that, for instance, the weather patterns stabilize again in a couple of decades, maybe?
Maybe in about 10 or 20 years, because man is the serious culprit in the weather change. You see, the extreme weathers, it's not that it didn't exist before. It did.
But it happened also on different planets. You have huge climate changes on Mars and Venus even. So
exactly. But then you see the thing that, yeah, that's right. But you see the escalation of what makes the problem even worse is our behavior and the way we treat the environment. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. It will get better, but it'll take another decade or two for us to actually wake up, to realize that we as human beings are actually instrumental in creating the fluctuations that we're experiencing and the harm that we have created on Earth. The Earth is a resilient being. We call it alive. It's alive. So because it's alive, when it's sick, like a human being, when a human being is sick, it heals itself. So there's a natural healing mechanism that will take into fact. But that means that we human beings have to also participate and not be the virus on Earth or the bacteria on Earth that's harming the Earth. So at the moment, the way we human beings behave is like the way bacteria or virus attacks our human body. So there has to be a natural reaction, and until we actually stop and change our ways, the Earth will start healing, but not until we change our ways.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to a large extent on this. For there's a lot of issues that we cause on this planet. I just don't think that it's that we affect the climate in such a way as is stated. But that's an opinion thing, and it's not so important here. But can you? Do you see anything, or did you ask the question astrologically regarding temperature change, or is that too one-sided? Maybe. Because if you have it makes a difference if you have a very hot climate and it's humid, or a very hot climate and it's dry, and also it's a big spectrum between desert and tropical climates, for instance. Or the same is true in winter. Now, if you have cold, dry winters, they are usually quite okay. If you have cold, wet winters, they're not very pleasant.
Okay, so weather related, you see what happens is we're just going on astrology, not on science, and not looking at the social, political, and economic factors. If we just focus on astrology itself, there are these cycles. And these cycles are basically every 12 years we go through a cycle where the weather patterns repeat itself every 12 years. And that's why I said it'll take a decade or so, because within that, we actually have to, there's another cycle that takes place every 30 years. So when you combine these two cycles, you see that the permutation and the combination gives it different ranges. Now, in spite of the fact that these cycles are taking place every 30 years and 12 years, and it's like a clock, it's like the big arm and the small arm, and how they operate, which is why I can predict the weathers based on these clock cycles, as we put it. But then there is the other factor which comes in, which is the amplitude, the magnification of the effect. So we can say there's the earth changes that's happening, which happened many times before. This is not the first time it's happening. But then because of the weather changes, because of the man-made disasters and influences, the effect that we get is more compounded because of the human factor.
Okay, so the human factor or the amplitude in this calculation would be something that is outside of astrology then, or I mean, it's yeah.
Yeah. So for instance, because there's the human experience. So now, if we say that, okay, was it 12 years ago? Were there many mudslides? We could probably say yes. But then the temperature did not increase as much as it does today. So today we find even the glaciers melting, and then so there's so many other factors that are coming into play. But of course, when you look at the industrial pollution in the waters and in the skies, including the air jets and things like that, all of that actually contribute to the experience that we have as
Yeah, I
humans.
mean, the only thing that I would acknowledge as a climate changing factor is that we are spraying huge amounts of aluminum and barium particles into the air, what is generally referred to as chemtrails. So that's one thing. So you have these cycles, but do you also have, like you say, 12-year cycles? Do you have bigger cycles, like for instance in meteorology, they have, of course, cycles between the so-called small ice ages that are, I don't remember how long they are, a couple of 100 years at least. I think it's usually solar cycles. Do you use something like this as well, or?
I do, but then what happens is that we don't have enough statistical data or historical data that would establish. A lot of what I'm doing, actually, it's my own formulas that I've been kind of doing. Now, I know that in the ancient times, astrology was pretty much used for as an almanac, particularly for farmers. Mm-hmm. So it played a really valuable tool for farmers, because the farmers had to predict how much rainfall they were going to have, what the weather is going to be like, what crops to grow, and astrology played an important role in weather predictions. Today we predict weather based on modern scientific tools. In the olden days, astrology was instrumental in predicting the weather in the olden days. So they were able to do that. Unfortunately, we don't have substantial data or records where it actually showed historically what worked, what didn't work. But I know astrology was very instrumental, a tool in weather predictions. And by the way, they were really amazingly accurate. In fact, even more accurate than Western science or modern weather predictions that are being done today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, because there are two major events that come to my mind in Indian history that have directly or indirectly to do with weather change. And I think one is mentioned in the Vedas as the slaying of, was it Mitra, the big ice serpent, or it was like an ice demon. And in a lot of texts, they refer to it as being basically the glaciers coming down from the Himalayas, and then there was, I think it was Indra who slayed him or killed this ice demon, and then the glaciers disappeared. I mean, this is a kind of a mythological thing, and it's referring to one of the many ice age myths.
Yeah.
And the second thing is more geological. I think when the Saraswati River disappeared, which is now geologically proven, seems to have been
You can also see that on satellite images. In fact, I've actually flown over the Saraswati River, and you see this huge waterbed, which is more. It looks more like a desert, but it's incredible. It takes over at a flight which is going maybe about 600 miles an hour. It still took more than an hour and a half to cross the riverbed.
Yeah,
the Saraswati riverbed.
It's amazing. Yeah, I've seen it too from the sky, and I mean, there were hundreds of cities there, not just villages, and they were, I think, abandoned in a very short time, and it caused a huge migration. And I think even the whole war between the Aryans and Asuras, as they refer to, happened during this time, most likely. So it was basically a very early climate change, geologically caused, maybe geologically, maybe partly also caused by what we call now climate events. So, but you don't think that there's anything in Vedic astrology that refers to such big cycles or such big events?
No, there is, because you start bringing in the outer planets into it, and then also you see some combination there. So we have certain cycles that are basically, so we have 30-year cycle, then we have another one that's about 36 years, and then also up until 99 years. So there are these cycles that we can kind of include. But like I said, we don't have tremendous data, because a lot of what Vedic astrology did was to focus on the present, which is mostly what are the farmers going to do, when are they going to sow the seeds, when they're going to harvest.
Yeah.
And a lot of Vedic astrology was used for families, dealing with familial problems and relationships and career and things like that. So you find that it actually just took a subset of that. However, if you really study not only Indian astrology, in fact, the Greek astrology, they really focused on weather-related events. And in fact, these cycles, really, there is a study done by actually the Golden Hind. There's an American kind of organization. It's called the Golden Hind Press, and they have come up with the cycles that are not only the short ones, the 36 and the 48 and the 98 years, but it goes to 120 years and 480 years and 960 years.
Yeah. Okay.
So in fact, if we really, this is another can of worms, really. If you look at history before 1400s, before 1460 actually, because recorded Western history, when paper and ink was available, was more around 1460. But if you look at history before that, you'll find that history was actually re-engineered based on astrology, based on these cycles. So you'll find that the cycles, historical repetitions happen every 480 years and 980 years. Now, interestingly, if you look at these cycles, they do not repeat after 1460. So you see that a lot of history that we know beyond, prior to 1460 was actually made up. So that's actually, a very interesting topic also.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating. I think you mentioned it once, and we discussed it briefly, because there's a German book about Charlemagne called Charles the Great, that basically states that there could be a possibility that he didn't exist at all, and that it was just made up in post by basically the Vatican, and a lot of the documents, and there are not many in European history of the Middle Ages, seem to have been forged afterwards to claim certain land titles, etc. So
exactly,
I think there is evidence to that, and it's quite a fascinating topic that we should probably go into one day. Another thing that just came to my mind, I mean, of course, for a normal astrologer, it's not very profitable, or, I mean, you cannot survive on predicting large changes, because usually that's not something how you can make money, and people also have to survive as astrologers.
Exactly, and it's also not a useful tool. It's sort of a hypothetical exercise to look at what's going to happen down the road, and a lot of astrology, is used to help people today, or in the next few months, or this year, or next year at the most. And in fact, because of the free will factor that we have, you find that certain changes do not happen until we're close to the event. So, for instance, when I make predictions about the U.S. presidency, who's going to win, it's very hard for me to do that a year or two before. But then when we're a few months closer, and we are clear about maybe two candidates, then it's easy to figure out which one is going to win, So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Another thing that I have on my list, another issue, is ocean levels. There's have been a lot of controversy, and of course, again, the official line is that it predicts rising sea levels. Though people like Al Gore, for instance, has a very large property directly on the ocean, doesn't bother him much, and he didn't sell it. And then there are people like Cliff High, for instance, who say that we will see lands rising instead. So he's basically of the opposite opinion, and he predicts this since the late 90s, I think. And what I checked so far, we have seen, for instance, like we see now another island forming in Hawaii. There has been an island being formed off the coast of Pakistan through volcanic activity. And we had multiple occasions, especially this year, of oceans disappearing for hours from coasts, South America, East Asia, etc., where people posted videos of boats sitting in the mud, and not like in Tanzania where you have fisher boats just sitting on the mud during a low tide, but really the ocean was out for miles and miles. And that was not really reported in mass media, but it's definitely happening. And is there something that you can see there on regarding water levels in the oceans, or is that not really? I mean, I guess you probably did not get into this much.
Yeah, from my perspective, I see that the water level is rising actually for a decade or two. Again, this is part of those cycles that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see water rising, and then right now, because of the climate changes, until we start reversing that. So we're looking at maybe 2 decades. So the first decade, for the first 12 years, we're going to see water rising levels. So we actually already see it. I mean, every time I fly over, let's say, the Arctic Circle, and I see glaciers literally breaking away. And it's also a little scary to see how many glaciers or how much water actually, how much ice actually melts into the ocean. So initially I see a rise in ocean levels, and then again we're going through another cycle where it was again that's when the ice age sort of begins, a mini ice. I'm not talking like a major ice age that we talked about in the olden days. That the water will start condensing again, and so the cold front will start coming maybe 10, 15 years from now actually.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I mean, water's rising is, if you see it from an astrological level, it could also mean that not the sea levels actually rise, but that you have more water in the atmosphere, which would also mean that the water is rising. No? So you have, and I think that's what we're seeing, especially in this summer, that there's much more moisture in the atmosphere, and then if it rains down, okay, it flows back to the oceans, but if it snows down in winter, then it does not really flow back to the ocean. So, and that's what we usually have seen during the small ice ages, the last small ice ages, like the Maunder Minimum, that you had a couple of years with a lot of also volcanic ashes in the atmosphere and a lot of moisture collecting. And so it was hot for a couple of years, and then usually it precipitated down. And yeah, I mean, that could be it's my interpretation or spin of it, of what you just said.
Yeah, but basically that's exactly how I see it. I mean, it's not going to be something, it's not going to be something like the end of the world or a major destruction. Of course, houses around the ocean, around the oceans. Actually, in America, I've seen that recently, that a lot of land is getting it's lost to water because of the rising ocean levels. So people have to give up their homes because the water levels have just come in. So we need that's about a 12-year cycle period, and then it's going to start reversing. A lot of that water will get condensed into the mountains and glaciers, and then over another 20 to 15 years, we'll see the water levels decreasing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but in general, it seems that it's accumulating in the atmosphere.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether you saw these reports down in there's somewhere on the eastern side, like on the oceans just outside Gujarat. They had a whole civilization that they just discovered, which existed underwater.
Yeah, I mean, this had happened, I think, in I mean, there were several stages, but I think they found more than one city and that's submerged. But this is also highly geologically active region. There's a lot of earthquakes in Gujarat and even recently, and you see that basically that changes a lot as well.
Right.
So we are almost. The time is almost up, but I have one more question by Sebastian from Portugal, who sent this question to me. And he wanted to know if you can make any predictions for the weather and climate in northern Portugal next year and possibly general trend for the next 5 years. Will it generally be cool or warm, storms, fires, more dry or rain? Because he has a large garden and of course he lives there. So
well, the prediction for Portugal is for this year we're going to see right now it's probably, I'm not sure whether it's raining there, what's been going on this summer, but it should probably be quite hot with dry winds, and then this fall we're going to see high winds with rain. Lots of rain this year and next year, I mean this fall and next year. And then following that, there's going to be a dry spell in the third year. And that dry spell actually it won't affect him as much because Porto is quite wet. But in the southern Portugal, which they're experiencing now, there's massive fires in southern Portugal. So we're going to see actually massive fires right now in southern Portugal and also in California. And both places, interestingly, on the western hemisphere of the continent. And these fires, what happens is these fires create, they uproot the trees. And that dryness then softens the soil, which actually leads to mudslides again. Mm-hmm. So we are going to see more mudslides in all of those areas next year. But where he lives, it's mostly going to be very wet next year. And then following that, the dry spell will be a good relief, which I'm sure will be good for him.
That would be 2020 then, or?
Yeah, 2020, yeah. And then we can talk more about that. Let's see whether these 2-3 years are coming out to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but it generally has to do with vegetation also, no? Because in both cases, that's quite interesting to say that they're both on the west end of the continent. And I think it has to do a lot with forestry because Portugal has been deforested for centuries.
Right. Yeah. But in his case, where he is, he's actually in, besides the moisture and the rain, he's actually very well placed. I mean, next year might not be a great year because of all the vegetation he has, but, it will stabilize. I think of all the places on Earth where he is quite stable. It's a very stable place,
okay.
in many ways.
Yeah, good to hear that. I mean, also politically, I think, but good. So then I think we let's wrap this up and we follow through with another video, I think, or 2 videos maybe at the end of the year regarding the storms and mudslides too.
Right.
I tried to come up with some statistics, even because it's really a bit of a fuzzy thing to prove, and I think you cannot totally prove it scientifically. But I tried to just find some data on if there was indeed an increase of mudslides and storms this year, and then we see from there.
Well, I mean, from the media reports. We last few years we didn't really hear about mudslides. We're hearing them now, so it's important just that distinction. If you just, of course, it's not an authentic scientific research, but the fact is, what are we experiencing now? For instance, there are mudslides and people are dying from it. So you find that this year there have been more mudslides and more deaths because of mudslides.
I mean, it's also a lot about language. If people are the question is what counts more: the objective happening of mudslides or the if we are affected by it. No, I mean, if it's in our consciousness and if it's taking place.
So it's more important to look at what's in our consciousness, because that is what's affecting us directly, and that's where astrology brings it in. You see, the astrology, the value of astrology is not that, okay, there is a mudslide in Mars. Okay, that's interesting, but who cares?
Yeah.
The mudslide that is affecting us as human beings and how it shifts our lifestyles and what effect it has on our culture that's prevalent there. What lifestyle changes do they have to? What lifestyle changes they're forced to get into or change and things like that. That's more relevant than what's happening elsewhere. So.
Good. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would really like to, if you're interested to talk about, is the largest climate or earth change cycles. If maybe we can do a small interview about this in the future.
Sure.
You said there's also some Greek sources, and I know that you studied Greek astrology as well. So if you're interested to talk about that, I would be I think it's a very fascinating topic because it's not so common in astrology.
No, it isn't. I'll be happy to talk about it.
Good. So thanks a lot, and hope to
Take care. And have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.